During Easter dinner, my daughter-in-law threw a wine glass at me after I refused to let her parents move into my house. She thought I would give in. She had no idea I had already started phase 1. Easter Sunday had always been sacred in my home. Not because of the expensive food or carefully decorated table, but because it was the one day each year when every member of my family promised to leave their arguments at the door. For 38 years, I had hosted Easter dinner in the same colonial house my late husband, Richard, and I bought after saving every spare dollar we had. Every room held a memory. The dining room still carried the faint scratch marks from where my son, Daniel, had driven his toy trucks across the hardwood floor. The kitchen window overlooked the apple tree Richard planted the week Daniel was born. Even after Richard passed away from a heart attack 6 years earlier, I refused to sell the house. It wasn't just property, it was the last place where our family still felt complete. At least, that's what I believed. By noon, the smell of roasted lamb, garlic potatoes, fresh bread, and cinnamon rolls filled every corner of the house. My granddaughter Emma raced through the hallway carrying plastic Easter eggs while laughing. She was 8 years old. The only reason I still looked forward to family gatherings. Daniel arrived 20 minutes later with his wife, Vanessa. The moment they stepped inside, I noticed something unusual. Neither of them smiled. Vanessa barely greeted me before walking through the house, opening doors and peeking into bedrooms. She wasn't admiring the decorations. She was counting. I knew exactly what she was counting. Bedrooms. For months, she'd been dropping hints. My parents are getting older. Their apartment is so small. They deserve better. Each conversation somehow ended with my house being mentioned. I always change the subject. Today, apparently, she wasn't planning to let me. Dinner began peacefully enough. We prayed. We laughed. Emma proudly showed everyone the eggs she'd painted. For nearly an hour, I convinced myself maybe I'd imagined the tension. Then Vanessa set down her fork. "We've made a decision," she announced. The room fell silent. Daniel cleared his throat but said nothing. Vanessa folded her hands together. "My parents are moving in here." Not asking, announcing. I blinked once. "I'm sorry." She smiled as though explaining something obvious to a child. "You have 3 empty bedrooms. My parents can use 2 of them." I looked at Daniel. He avoided my eyes. "Daniel," he sighed. "It just makes sense, Mom." "Makes sense. They can't afford another rent increase." I nodded slowly. "I'm sorry they're struggling." Vanessa leaned forward. "So you agree?" "No." The single word landed like thunder. Her smile disappeared. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean exactly that. This house isn't available." Daniel rubbed his forehead. "Mom, I've already helped them several times. I paid for your wedding. I helped with your down payment. I babysit Emma every weekend. But I am not turning my home into someone else's retirement plan." Vanessa laughed. An ugly laugh. "I knew you'd be selfish." Emma quietly stopped eating. I noticed. Apparently no one else did. I remained calm. "This discussion is over." Vanessa stood. "No, it isn't." Her voice echoed through the dining room. "My parents deserve this house more than one old woman living alone." That sentence hurt more than I expected. Daniel didn't correct her. Not once. Instead, he looked at me. "Mom, why are you making this difficult?" I stared at my own son. The little boy I'd carried through fevers. The teenager whose college tuition Richard and I worked overtime to pay. Now he was asking why I wouldn't surrender my home. I said no. Vanessa grabbed her wine glass. For 1 second, I assumed she was taking another drink. Instead, she threw it. The glass exploded against the side of my face. Pain erupted instantly. Warm blood streamed down my cheek. Emma screamed. Someone dropped a plate. The room froze. Vanessa looked shocked. Not because she'd thrown it. Because she'd actually hit me. Daniel stood. "Mom." I gently raised my hand. "No." Blood dripped onto the white tablecloth. I calmly picked up my purse. Walked toward the front door. No yelling. No crying. No threats. Just silence. Behind me, Vanessa shouted. "You're seriously leaving?" I opened the door, turned once, smiled, and said quietly, "I hope you're ready for what happens next." Then I drove myself to the emergency room. As blood continued running down my neck, I unlocked my phone. My attorney had been my friend for 25 years. I sent exactly 6 words. "Phase 1 is complete. Start immediately." 3 minutes later, his reply arrived, already notifying the police. I looked into the rearview mirror. For the first time all day, I smiled. The emergency room doors slid open just as I stumbled inside, pressing a folded napkin against the side of my face. The white cloth was soaked dark red before I reached the reception desk. A nurse gasped, "Oh my goodness. Sit down, ma'am." I was hit by a glass, I answered calmly. Within minutes, I was in a treatment room while another nurse gently cleaned the blood from my cheek. The cut stretched from my temple to just below my ear. It was deep enough to need several stitches. The doctor frowned. "Who threw it?" "My daughter-in-law." He paused. "Intentionally?" "Yes." He looked at me for a long second before quietly writing something in my medical chart. "By law, we have to report injuries caused by assault. The police will likely want to speak with you." I was expecting them. The doctor looked surprised. "You were?" I simply nodded. A few minutes later, 2 police officers entered the room. One of them introduced himself. "I'm Officer Reynolds. Can you tell us exactly what happened?" I told them everything, from the Easter dinner invitation to Vanessa's demand that her parents move into my home, Daniel's silence, and finally the wine glass flying across the table. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't raise my voice. I simply told the truth. When I finished, Officer Reynolds closed his notebook. "Do you wish to press charges?" "Absolutely." He nodded once. "We'll begin immediately." As they left, my phone vibrated. "Daniel." I let it ring. Again. And again. 7 missed calls. Then came the text. "Mom, please answer. It was an accident." Another message appeared almost instantly. "Vanessa didn't mean to throw it that hard." I stared at the screen. Not "I'm sorry." Not "Are you okay?" Just excuses. I locked the phone. Half an hour later, another visitor arrived. Not Daniel. Not Vanessa. My attorney, Michael Carter. He walked in carrying a leather briefcase and a folder nearly an inch thick. "You look better than I expected," he joked gently. "I've had worse paper cuts." He smiled. "Good. You'll need your sense of humor." He placed the folder on the table. "I've already started." I raised an eyebrow. "So quickly? You told me years ago that if anyone ever tried to force you out of your home, you wanted everything ready." Richard and I had prepared for exactly that. After seeing several friends lose their homes because of family pressure, we'd quietly put protections in place. The house wasn't simply in my name. It sat inside a carefully structured family trust. No one, not Daniel, not his wife, not anyone else, could claim ownership while I was alive. And if anyone attempted intimidation, fraud, or abuse to obtain the property, they would automatically lose any future inheritance. Michael slid a document toward me. "Remember this clause?" I smiled. "Every word." He tapped the page. "Today's police report activates it." For the first time that day, I felt something lift from my shoulders. They hadn't just attacked me. They had destroyed their own future. Meanwhile, across town, Daniel sat in his living room while Vanessa paced back and forth. "She's overreacting," Vanessa snapped. It was one glass. Daniel wasn't so sure anymore. His phone buzzed. "Unknown number." He answered. "This is Officer Reynolds with the County Police Department." Daniel's face turned pale. "We'd like you and your wife to come to the station regarding an assault investigation." Vanessa froze. "What did they say?" Daniel lowered the phone slowly. "They're charging you." Vanessa laughed nervously. "They can't." But deep down, for the first time all day, she realized they absolutely could. The police station was unusually quiet when Daniel and Vanessa arrived. Vanessa walked in with the same confidence she'd worn at Easter dinner. She whispered, "This is ridiculous. Once they hear my side, they'll drop everything." Officer Reynolds greeted them and led them into separate interview rooms. "Separate?" Vanessa asked. "Standard procedure." Her confidence faded. Daniel answered every question honestly. "Did your wife throw the glass?" "Yes." "Did your mother threaten anyone?" "No." "Did your mother strike your wife?" "No." "Were there witnesses?" "Yes." "Who?" "My daughter, Emma." Daniel lowered his head. Saying his own daughter's name out loud made him realize how badly things had spiraled. In the next room, Vanessa insisted it had been an accident. "I just lost my grip." Officer Reynolds placed several photographs on the table. The deep cut on my face. The shattered wine glass. The blood-stained tablecloth. Then he spoke quietly. 3 witnesses stated you stood up, yelled, and deliberately threw the glass." Vanessa's expression changed. "You interviewed everyone already. We move quickly when there's serious bodily injury." Meanwhile, I was discharged from the hospital with 8 stitches and strict instructions to rest. Instead, I drove home. As I pulled into the driveway, something caught my attention. The front gate was open. A moving truck sat outside. My heart skipped. 2 men were unloading furniture. I stepped out of my car. Excuse me, who hired you? One worker checked his paperwork. Mrs. Vanessa Carter. I see, and we're moving her parents into this address. I smiled politely. I'm afraid someone gave you false information. At that moment, a black sedan pulled into the driveway. Michael, my lawyer. He stepped out carrying a folder. Perfect timing. He walked directly to the movers. I'm attorney Michael Carter. This property is protected under a private trust. No one except the owner has legal authority to move anyone into this residence. He handed them official documents. The crew leader read them carefully. Within seconds, he turned to his team. Pack everything back up. One of the movers sighed. Again, apparently, this wasn't the first family dispute they'd seen. As the truck drove away, another car arrived. Vanessa's parents. They looked confused. What happened? Her father asked. Michael answered before I could. You have no legal right to occupy this property. Vanessa's mother frowned. Our daughter said the house would be ours. I'm afraid she made promises she couldn't legally keep. Neither of them spoke. For the first time, they realized Vanessa had never actually owned the house. She had simply assumed she would. Michael turned to me. Phase 2 is complete. I looked at the house Richard and I had built together. No, I said softly. Phase 2 has only just begun. Far across town, Daniel's phone rang again. It was Emma. Dad, he answered immediately. Sweetheart, are you okay? Her small voice broke his heart. Grandma was bleeding. ... Why didn't you help her? Daniel had no answer. And for the first time in his life, his silence hurt more than any words ever could. Emma's question echoed in Daniel's mind long after the call ended. Why didn't you help Grandma? He sat alone in his car outside the police station, unable to answer. For years, he'd convinced himself that keeping Vanessa happy was the same as keeping his family together. Now he realized the price had been his mother's trust, and his daughter's respect. Meanwhile, I spent the evening cleaning the dining room. The blood was gone. The broken glass had been swept away. But one empty chair still caught my attention. Richard's chair. I sat in it for a moment and whispered, "You always said character reveals itself under pressure." You were right. The next morning, Michael arrived with more documents. The prosecutor is moving forward with the assault case, he said. And there's something else. He handed me a folder. Inside were copies of emails. Vanessa had been contacting real estate agents for weeks. One message read, "Once my husband convinces his mother, we'll be selling the property." Another listed renovation ideas for my home, as if it already belonged to her. I closed the folder slowly. So this wasn't a moment of anger. Michael nodded. It looks planned. Just then, the doorbell rang. It was Daniel. He looked exhausted. His eyes were red from lack of sleep. Mom, can we talk? I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. What do you want? I'm sorry. You watched your wife assault me. I know. You said nothing. I know. You let her believe she could take my home. He couldn't deny it. I made the biggest mistake of my life. I looked at him for several seconds. I believe you're sorry. Hope appeared on his face. Then I continued, but being sorry doesn't erase consequences. His shoulders dropped. The legal case will continue. He nodded silently, and until I decide otherwise. Don't come back here. Tears filled his eyes, but he didn't argue. He simply whispered, I understand. As he walked away, I felt no victory. Only sadness. Sometimes the hardest lesson a parent teaches comes long after childhood ends. And Daniel was finally learning that love does not mean allowing disrespect. The following week, the story spread through the neighborhood. Not because I told anyone. Because police cars had arrived on Easter Sunday, an ambulance had visited my home, and a moving truck had been turned away in broad daylight. People talked. I didn't. I focused on healing. The stitches still pulled every time I smiled, but the pain in my heart was far worse. Then Michael called. The prosecutor has officially filed assault charges against Vanessa. Has she hired a lawyer? Yes. And he wants to negotiate. I almost laughed. After everything, he believes you'll drop the case. I won't. 2 days later, Daniel called again. This time I answered. Mom, Vanessa wants to apologize. Does she? Can we meet? I'll meet with you. And Vanessa? No. Silence. Finally, Daniel said, I understand. We met at a quiet cafe. Daniel looked older than I remembered. I filed for separation, he said softly. I stared at him. You did. I couldn't ignore what happened anymore. Emma is terrified of her mother. I should have protected both of you. For the first time since Easter, I believed he was telling me the whole truth. I've started counseling, he continued. I know I can't undo what I did, but I want to become someone Emma can respect again. I nodded. That's a better goal than trying to earn my forgiveness. He lowered his eyes. I deserve that. Before leaving, he placed an envelope on the table. Inside was a cashier's check. What's this? The hospital bill. I don't want your money. I know. It's not payment. It's responsibility. After a long pause, I accepted it. Not because the money mattered. Because accepting responsibility was the first honest thing my son had done in weeks. That evening, I sat on the porch watching the sunset. Richard used to say that a strong house isn't built with bricks. It's built with boundaries. Now I finally understood what he meant. The house still stood. So did I. And for the first time since that terrible Easter dinner, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Peace. 3 months later, the courtroom was full. Vanessa entered with her attorney, dressed in an expensive suit and wearing an expression that suggested she was the victim. She never looked at me. I sat beside Michael, calm and prepared. When the judge entered, everyone stood. The prosecutor called the first witness. Emma wasn't asked to testify. The court had already determined that putting a child through that experience wasn't necessary because there was overwhelming evidence. Instead, the prosecutor presented the emergency room records, photographs of my injuries, the shattered wine glass collected from the house, statements from the guests who witnessed the attack. Then came the surprise. The prosecutor displayed printed emails and text messages recovered through the investigation. One message from Vanessa read, "Once the house is ours, we'll renovate everything. She won't have a choice." Another said, "If she refuses, we'll pressure her until she gives in." The courtroom fell silent. Vanessa's attorney objected, but the judge allowed the messages into evidence. Vanessa's face turned pale. Her own words had destroyed her defense. When it was my turn to testify, I answered every question calmly. I never promised to let anyone move into my home. I never threatened Vanessa. I simply said no. The judge listened carefully. After hours of testimony, the hearing ended. Before leaving, the judge looked directly at Vanessa. Family disagreements never justify violence. The court will issue its decision after reviewing all evidence. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. I ignored every microphone and walked straight to my car. Michael smiled. You handled that perfectly. I looked at the courthouse one last time. No matter what the verdict is, they can never take my peace again. 2 weeks later, the courtroom was packed again. This time, everyone knew a decision was coming. Vanessa sat quietly beside her attorney. The confidence she had carried on Easter Sunday was gone. The judge reviewed the evidence one final time before speaking. The defendant deliberately threw a wine glass, causing bodily injury. The evidence also shows a pattern of attempting to pressure the victim into surrendering her property. The courtroom fell silent. I find the defendant guilty. Vanessa closed her eyes. Her attorney whispered something, but she didn't respond. The judge continued. In addition to the criminal penalties imposed by this court, a permanent no-contact order is granted. The defendant is prohibited from contacting or approaching the victim without legal permission. I took a slow breath. It wasn't about revenge. It was about finally feeling safe. Outside the courthouse, Daniel caught up with me. Mom, I stopped. I heard the verdict. I nodded. I'm not asking you to forgive Vanessa, he said. I'm not even asking you to forgive me. What are you asking? He swallowed. Just give me the chance to prove I can become a better son. For the first time in months, I saw genuine humility in his eyes. I can't promise anything, I said. I know, but if you want another chance, earn it through your actions, not your words. He nodded. I will. As he walked away, I noticed Emma waiting beside his car. She smiled and waved. I smiled back. For the first time since Easter, hope felt possible. The family we once had was gone. But perhaps, with honesty, accountability, and time, a new one could still be built. The guilty verdict should have been the end. Instead, it became the beginning of something none of us expected. 3 weeks after the trial, Michael called me again. I think you should come to my office. Is something wrong? No, he replied. Something has changed. When I arrived, he placed a thick envelope on his desk. It came from Vanessa's attorney. Inside was a handwritten letter. It wasn't addressed to the court. It was addressed to me. Mrs. Carter. For months I blamed everyone except myself. I convinced myself that I deserved your house because my parents needed one. I told myself that if I pushed hard enough, you would eventually give in. When you refused, I lost control. There is no excuse for what I did. I injured you, frightened Emma, and destroyed my own family. I know you may never forgive me, and I understand why. I am writing only to say that I am finally accepting responsibility for my actions. I read the letter twice before setting it down. Michael asked quietly, "What do you think?" "I think it's the first honest thing she's done. But it doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't." A few days later, Daniel stopped by the house again. This time he didn't knock. He was outside, trimming the overgrown hedges Richard used to care for every spring. I opened the front door. "You know you're still not invited inside." He smiled sadly. "I know, I'm just trying to help." For the next 4 hours, he worked without asking for anything. He repaired the loose fence, cleaned the gutters, replanted flowers that had died during the summer heat. Before leaving, he simply said, "Goodbye, Mom." No apology, no request, just goodbye. As I watched him drive away, I realized something important. People don't rebuild trust with speeches. They rebuild it one quiet action at a time. Over the next several months, Daniel kept showing up every Saturday morning. Sometimes he mowed the lawn. Sometimes he fixed broken shelves. Sometimes he left fresh groceries on the porch and drove away before I opened the door. He never crossed a boundary. He never asked to come inside. And little by little, the anger I carried began to feel lighter. One crisp autumn afternoon, there was another knock. This time, it was Emma. She stood on the porch holding a small wooden box. "I made this in school," she said. "For you." Inside was a hand-painted heart with 2 words carved into it. "Love wins." Tears filled my eyes. Emma wrapped her arms around me. "I missed you, Grandma. I missed you too, sweetheart." At that moment, I knew one thing for certain. No lawsuit, no inheritance, no house, could ever be worth more than protecting the people who still chose kindness. Winter arrived quietly. The first snow covered the front yard Richard had once spent hours decorating every Christmas. Looking out the living room window, I realized it was the first holiday season in years that felt peaceful. The silence no longer felt lonely. It felt earned. One Saturday morning, Daniel called. "Mom, would you meet me somewhere?" After a long pause, I agreed. We met at the cemetery. Richard's grave was covered with fresh flowers. Daniel stood there with his hands in his coat pockets. "I've been coming here every week," he admitted. "I keep wondering what Dad would say if he had seen what I allowed to happen." I looked at the headstone. Without thinking, I answered. "He would have told you that admitting you're wrong is only the first step. Living differently is the second." Daniel nodded. "I've been trying." "I know." He looked surprised. "You do. I've noticed every fence you've repaired, every bag of groceries you've left, every promise you've kept without asking for praise." His eyes filled with tears. "I don't expect everything to go back to normal. It won't," I replied gently. "But that doesn't mean we can't build something new." For the first time since Easter, I hugged my son. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. A month later, Michael invited me to his office one final time. "I've updated your estate plan," he said. "You've thought this through carefully." "I have." The trust remained exactly as Richard and I had intended. No one would inherit because they demanded it. They would inherit because they valued family, honesty, and respect. Michael smiled. Richard would be proud. So would I. Meanwhile, Vanessa finalized the divorce. She accepted the court's judgment and moved to another state to start over. Her parents rented a small apartment nearby and, for the first time, apologized to me. "We believed everything our daughter told us," her father admitted quietly. "We should have asked you instead." I appreciated the apology, but I also understood that forgiveness and trust are not the same thing. I wished them well and closed that chapter of my life. The following Easter, exactly 1 year after the attack, I hosted dinner again. The dining room looked almost identical. The same table, the same dishes, the same family recipes, but one thing had changed. There was no tension, only gratitude. Emma helped place colorful eggs around the table while laughing. Daniel carved the roast just as Richard used to. Before we ate, Emma stood up. "I want to say something." Everyone looked at her. "Grandma taught me that a home isn't about who owns it. It's about who protects it." The room became silent. I reached across the table and held her hand. Richard had once told me that storms reveal which trees have deep roots. Our family had survived the worst storm we had ever faced. Not because we were perfect, but because the people willing to change chose truth over pride. As I looked around the table, I quietly thanked Richard. His house was still standing. His values were still alive. and the family he worked so hard to build had finally learned the lesson he spent a lifetime teaching. Sometimes the strongest walls aren't made of brick. They're built with courage, respect, and the strength to say no when it matters most. Life didn't return to the way it had been before Easter. It became something different, something stronger. Months passed, and the scars on my face slowly faded. Most people no longer noticed them. I still did every morning when I looked in the mirror. But instead of reminding me of pain, they reminded me of survival. One afternoon, I received an unexpected letter from the community center. They were organizing a seminar for senior homeowners about financial scams, property fraud, and family pressure involving inheritance. Someone had recommended me as a guest speaker. At first, I almost declined. Then I remembered how frightened I had felt when I realized people I loved believed they had a right to my home. If sharing my story could help even one person avoid that situation, it would be worth it. The auditorium was filled with retirees, widows, and couples who had spent decades building their lives. When I finished speaking, an elderly woman approached me. "My daughter has been pressuring me to sign over my house," she whispered. I thought I was alone. I gently held her hand. "You're not alone. Never let guilt make your decisions." She smiled through tears. "Thank you." As I drove home that evening, I realized something important. What had nearly destroyed my family had also given me a chance to protect others. Weeks later, Daniel invited me to Emma's school awards ceremony. Emma had won first place in an essay contest. The topic was simple: the bravest person I know. When Emma walked onto the stage, she looked directly at me. "My grandma taught me that being brave doesn't always mean fighting," she read. "Sometimes being brave means saying no when everyone expects you to say yes." The audience applauded. I wiped away a tear before anyone noticed. After the ceremony, Emma ran into my arms. "Did you like it, Grandma?" I loved every word. Daniel stood nearby, smiling quietly. He didn't interrupt. He didn't ask for praise. He simply watched his daughter hug her grandmother, knowing that moments like this had to be earned. On the drive home, I passed the old apple tree Richard had planted decades earlier. It was full of fruit again. For years, I had thought the tree survived because of sunshine. Now I knew better. It survived because its roots were deep enough to withstand every storm. Families are much the same. Some branches break, some leaves fall away, but if the roots are built on love, honesty, and respect, new growth is always possible. That evening, I placed Richard's favorite photograph back on the fireplace. "I think you'd like how things turned out," I whispered. The house was quiet, peaceful, safe, exactly as we had always hoped it would be. And for the first time in a very long time, I knew the future no longer frightened me. Whatever came next, I was ready. Because home was never just the place I lived. It was the place where respect would always be stronger than entitlement. And where love would never again be mistaken for weakness. Nearly 2 years passed before I truly understood what Easter had changed. One warm spring afternoon, I was sitting on the front porch when a familiar blue pickup truck stopped at the curb. Daniel stepped out carrying a toolbox, while Emma followed with a small box of flower seedlings. "Grandma," Emma called with a grin, "we brought help." I laughed. Help for what? To plant a new garden. Richard had always dreamed of expanding the flower beds along the front walkway, but life had gotten busy, and we never found the time. Seeing Daniel kneel in the soil where his father once worked brought back memories I hadn't visited in years. For several hours, we worked side by side. No difficult conversations, no apologies, no arguments, just honest work. Sometimes silence says more than words ever can. As the sun began to set, Daniel wiped the dirt from his hands. "Mom, there's something I want you to know." I looked at him. "I've been offered a promotion." "Congratulations. It comes with a larger house." "That's wonderful." He smiled. For the first time, I realized something. "What?" "I don't need your house." I remained quiet. I never did. I only needed to stop believing I was entitled to it. Those words meant more than any apology he had ever spoken. Later that evening, Emma carefully placed the last flower into the ground. She stepped back proudly. "Grandpa would like this." "I think he would," I replied. A gentle breeze moved through the apple tree, scattering a few blossoms across the lawn. For a brief moment, it felt as though Richard was still watching over us. That night, after everyone had gone home, I locked the front door and turned off the lights. The house was still mine. Not because I had fought to keep it, but because I had refused to surrender my dignity. The greatest lesson I learned wasn't about inheritance, lawyers, or courtrooms. It was this: people who truly love you will never demand what you've worked your entire life to build. They will protect it with you. I looked around the quiet living room one last time before heading upstairs. The photographs on the wall told the story of an imperfect family that had survived its darkest chapter. Some relationships had ended, others had healed, all of them had changed. And somehow, that was enough. As I turned off the final light, I smiled. Easter had once been the day my family nearly fell apart. Now it had become the day that reminded us why respect, accountability, and forgiveness matter more than any house ever could. The future was uncertain, as it always is. But one thing would never change. This home would always remain a place where kindness was welcome, and entitlement would never again cross the front door. A few months later, the town held its annual neighborhood picnic. For years, Richard and I had attended together. After he passed away, I stopped going. The memories were simply too painful. This time, Emma wouldn't accept. No, Grandma, she insisted, everyone wants to see you. So I went. As we walked through the park, dozens of familiar faces greeted us. Some remembered the Easter incident. Others had only heard rumors. Not one person asked about the lawsuit. Instead, they asked how I was doing. That meant more than they could have known. While Emma played with her friends, Daniel quietly handed me a folded envelope. "What's this? Open it later." When I returned home that evening, I unfolded the letter. It wasn't a legal document. It wasn't an apology. It was a handwritten promise. "Mom, I spent too many years believing that family meant taking without asking. You taught me that real family protects one another, even when it's difficult. I can't erase what happened, but I can make sure it never happens again. Thank you for giving me the chance to become a better father and a better man." I placed the letter inside Richard's old Bible, where I kept the family's most treasured memories. Years later, Emma graduated from college with honors. As she crossed the stage, she spotted me in the front row and smiled. After the ceremony, she hugged me tightly. "You know why I studied law?" I smiled. "I have a feeling you're about to tell me." "Because of you." She laughed. "I watched you stand up for yourself without hatred. You trusted the law instead of revenge. I want to help people the way your lawyer helped you." In that moment, I realized that even painful experiences can leave behind something beautiful. Not because suffering is good, but because courage can inspire the next generation. That evening, our family gathered once more around the same dining table where everything had changed years earlier. This time, there was laughter instead of shouting, respect instead of entitlement, gratitude instead of resentment. I looked at every face around the table and quietly whispered to myself, "We made it." The scars on my face had almost disappeared. The scars on our family had taken much longer. But unlike the ones on my skin, those invisible scars had taught us lessons we would never forget. As the evening ended and everyone prepared to leave, I stood on the porch watching the sunset over Richard's apple tree. It was stronger than ever. So was I, and I finally understood the greatest inheritance Richard had ever left behind. It wasn't this house. It wasn't money. It was the courage to protect what was right, even when the people you love are the ones standing against you.